Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for November 7, 2018. We'll begin with the zoning calendar. New case, item number 1, 2018-169BZ, 43 West 12th Road in Queens. This is a Build It Back project.
Hello. I'm just going to share some information about this project, a quick summary. So this project is requesting a special permit 6492 for some bulk modifications for the reconstruction of a Hurricane Sandy damaged home. This is a complete reconstruction and the site is vacant right now, and construction is not permitted to start until the BSA approval. The building is manufactured and will be assembled on the site and is not a modular home. The property is located in Broad Channel, Queens, Community District 14. It's in the R3A Special Coastal Risk District. It's a 2,500 square foot lot, which is 25 by 100. It is located within a street widening line and along the waterfront, and it received a GCL 35 from BSA under calendar number 2016-3534A. The proposed is a single-family, 3-story detached home. The waivers requested are the planting requirement under ZR 23451, the visual mitigation requirement under 6461, the side yard requirement under 23461, and the waterfront yard pursuant to 62332. So the FAR is, for the proposed home, is 0.59.
Sorry, say it again.
0.59 proposed, which is a slight increase from the previous. Although the underlying zoning district has a 0.5 FAR, it's permitted to be increased by 20% pursuant to 64A312 in the neighborhood recovery areas section. So they're under the 0.6. And because of the increase in floor area and the movement of bulk from the rear to the front, although the home will be in the same exact footprint, it's considered an increase in the degree of noncompliance for the side yard, which is 1.9 feet and 4.1 feet existing in the pre-existing condition and in the proposed condition, where 0 and 8 feet total is required pursuant to 23461. And the waterfront yard required is 30 feet, and the pre-existing and proposed waterfront yard is 27 feet as measured from the mean high water line. The other waivers being requested are for the planting requirement pursuant to 23451, which 25% plantings is required. However, the home, it is impossible to provide this because a sidewalk occupies the front yard because of the street widening line, and the stoop occupies about 40% of the front yard. So the staircase is 3 feet wide as required by the building code with handrail that makes it 4 feet. And because only 10% of the front yard remains for planting, that's all they can provide. And due to this tight configuration, they also cannot provide the visual mitigation elements required by section 6461.
But the stoop is one of the visual mitigation. They need
porch. A porch.
A porch. Oh, I thought if they have stairs going up.
They have a stair direction change, which they can't provide. I can ask them to describe the reasons for each visual mitigation element and why they can't provide it. But basically, the 3-foot high bushes, there's not enough space for that. The stair direction turn, there's not enough space. And the porch, they don't have enough space with their stairs. So, in summary. And they're also requesting a waiver of the board's rules of practice and procedure.
Great. Thank you.
Go on. Appeals calendar decision item. Item number 2, 2018-63A, 30 Columbia Heights, Brooklyn.
Okay, I think this was fully briefed. There were no additional materials submitted as far as I know. So I don't think there's anything more to discuss. We'll just vote on this tomorrow.
New cases, item number 3, 2017-249A, Major Deegan Expressway and South and Van Cortlandt, Bronx, the Bronx.
Right. We have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. I'm rather confused by appellant's submission, I have to admit. The photos are undated, and the submission is either mixed with submissions for other signs because none of them are explained. So that are not before us, or with documents the purpose of which is unexplained. The appellant has to walk us through the proofs and explain to the board, to me anyway, how these support their argument for nonconforming status. I learned actually only from DOB's submission, which was very clear and complete, that the sign is located 10 feet from the Major Deegan on CSX property, railway property, but is not exempt from compliance with the zoning resolution as a result of this board's determination and an Article 78 Supreme Court decision, which upheld the board's determination and remanded to DOB to review whether nonconforming status could be proven. That was not explained by the appellant at all. The tax photo is undated, and no tax map was provided to verify that that's an image of the subject sign. And there are no dates on any of the photos provided, so I'm totally lost, and I can understand why DOB kept asking for more and said no. Anybody else?
No, I agree with you. The information provided was very inadequate for me to, and I think this is a similar kind of issue we had raised with some of the other CSX and signs along the railroad. So the appellant should be aware of our comments from the previous.
Anybody else?
DOB made a very extensive and concise argument, and if the applicant wants us to entertain this, I think they have to do a lot more work. I would like a timeline and with photos on that timeline to, right now we have nothing to actually vote on for this application. They haven't provided us but any of the information that one would expect in an application like this.
Right. There's something not for us to vote on, but
But
it's
not
not in
positive-
support
not
of the appellant's argument. Right. Okay, thank you.
Item number 4, 2017-310A, 1002 Farragut Road, Brooklyn.
We have proof of service of initial application to property owner. I didn't see the returned signed green cards, but we do have, as of Monday night, a submission from the owner who is represented by counsel. DOB here argues that revocation of the certificate of occupancy is appropriate because, quote, modification of the C of O is appropriate because what they call regulated medical waste transfer station is use group 18 and not accessory to automotive repair. DOB asked that we not consider whether what's abbreviated as RMWT is properly designated use group 18, which was the subject of a ZRD1, but merely whether it is accessory to the principal use at the site, which is described on the certificate of occupancy as automotive repair. Without more on that subject, I agree that transfer of medical waste, even if this is merely a receiving station for sealed containers, and there is no further handling of the materials than to unload and reload from one truck to another, is not customarily associated with automotive use. I just want to remind, though, in a prior BSA decision, we were very careful not to close the door to unusual combinations of uses that might not be obvious or that might reflect changes in business operations. But in this case, I don't see that there's an argument having been made that this is an accessory used automotive, and in fact, the owner doesn't contest it, in fact, agrees based on that very recent submission. I just question why, in the first place, the owner filed for Schedule A to show this its use as accessory, and why not show it as a use that was permissible in a C81. The owner's recent submission indicates that it has already taken steps to modify the certificate of occupancy to use group 16D motor freight station. And whether that's the proper use is actually not a question that's before us at this point. So I think the DOB's application may actually be premature, or I'm struggling with this. However, the DOB did deny the owner's ZRD1 to categorize the use in use group 16. But such a challenge would need to be brought by the owner, not by DOB, as it is here. DOB is only bringing the modification of the CFO to us. Apparently, though, the owner already has an approved alteration type 1 to change the use to motor freight station, parentheses, regulated medical waste, and received approvals on October 30th that resolved the initial audit, which approvals DOB revoked the next day. So I have to say I'm very confused about DOB's position in this case and why they won't allow the owner to complete the CO application process or allow it to file an appeal of DOB's determination if DOB in fact disagrees with its own plan examiner effectively that the 16D is not the right use. So yeah, I really want to understand better why DOB is not allowing the applicant, the property owner, to proceed with the amendment of the CFO. If use group 16D is an acceptable designation for this use, if DOB believes that. Anybody else?
That's the part I wasn't quite clear. It seemed like there was an approval given by DOB to change the use to use group 16D.
They approved the Schedule A change,
They have
right.
approved the Schedule A. So it's just a matter of changing the certificate of occupancy.
So the problem is two things were going on simultaneously in a certain way. So DOB, very oddly, started off like this. Though the building had a CFO, they revoked the permit.
Right.
Which is quite strange because the building as a CFO it no longer has an active permit. So they send a notice to the owner that we're revoking your permit, and in response to that, under an audit, and in response to that, the owner goes in and files those two ZRD1s, arguing first that it's an accessory use, and then second, arguing that it's actually use group 16. So, and both of which DOB denies, right? Simultaneously, DOB comes here to revoke the CFO. I'm sorry, I keep saying that. Modify the CFO, which is quite confusing because the owner simultaneously says, okay, we'll amend the CFO to show use group 16 instead of accessory use. So there's two trails going on, but the problem is the audit that generated the potential to revoke permits hasn't been lifted. It was rescinded for a minute, and then the next day it was with that recession was withdrawn.
Right.
So something, DOB's own paperwork is at odds with itself, and it's making it difficult for us to figure out what we should be doing here, because while I don't disagree, nor does the owner, that it's not an accessory use, the reasonable way to handle this is for the owner to amend its CFO through the alteration type 1 process, which everyone does.
Right.
And we have an application before us right now for a house, right, where the homeowner said, okay, I'll amend the CFO to show 2 families, and I'll change the house back to 2 family. And instead of revoking the CFO, we waited, right, until eventually DOB withdrew the application. So, anybody else? Okay.
Special order calendar decision items. Item number 5, 2496BZ, 213 Madison Street, Manhattan.
They requested a deferral on this.
Item number 6, continue hearing items. Item number 6, 62468BZ, 1880715 Northern Boulevard.
Requested an adjournment.
Item number 7, 7595BZ, 1635 3rd Avenue, Manhattan.
We have a letter from the applicant stating that the fire alarm system is in the design phase with completion on the installation expected in 5 months. Fire department has a letter just from a few days ago which recommends a conditional approval, but I would actually like to hear from fire department tomorrow what they want the conditions to be, because there are violations for the absence of a PA permit and fire alarm system, and fire department states that those orders will be enforced by criminal summons, and maybe that's why, but we don't know what the conditions should be, so we should talk about what that is tomorrow. Unless they want to provide us with a letter to clarify.
Go on. Item number 8, 13204BZ, 310 East Houston Street, Manhattan.
Okay, this one was just to clear up some of the history of sort of the transfer of the site, of the development rights. But part of it is I was trying to clean up the record, because we have this strange, what I call creeping floor zoning lot area that has changed by 115 square feet since 2004. And when you multiply that by available floor area, by the FAR, you get some serious amount of valuable floor area. So the applicant states that it can't locate the old surveys, which I find actually hard to believe, because actually there are not that many surveyors in New York, oddly. So you can usually just call around and say, hey, did you do a survey for my property? So anyways, and usually the surveyor that you do call, this one's the control point, often it's the surveyor who did it the last time. So they have the old survey and they just update, right? So my question is, did control point do a new survey from scratch, or did they just update, in which case they have the prior information? And often surveyors reach out to the surveyor who did it the last time, because that way they'll be sure to have all the materials. So I find it actually hard to believe that they didn't find any of the old surveys. And also because we're looking at what the lot area is, and this is a very oddly shaped site, I'd like them to ask control point to check their math, because they do provide a total, but the lot is so oddly shaped, and that they may have made a mistake on the math. And it wouldn't be the first time that a surveyor makes a mistake. Also, my experience is when dealing with development right transfers, you get a development rights survey. So you don't just rely on the lot area and then do the math. The lawyer doesn't do the math, the surveyor does. So we should get a copy of their development rights survey. That way we will know that we can clean the record, and that's the final size of the lot. The engineer has a letter that reiterates the last version of existing floor area, because I had asked for clarification on what was actually built subsequent to the 2004 grant, and whether there's any new construction that was done after 2004 or that's proposed. The letter from the engineer states that there isn't anything proposed, and these are the as-built. But actually, the difference in what was approved and what the engineer is saying is about 2,000 square feet. So that's significant. Maybe it eats up the available floor area, or maybe it's related to the extra 115 square feet from the zoning lot. I don't know, but I'm just trying to clear this up, because we have all of these creeping numbers, and I don't see how that happened. Also, at the last hearing, I asked that the drawings show the bridge built full to the lot lines, which it is, and the drawings don't show that. It shows it as this little sliver, but when you look at it from above, it's built full to the lot line. You can walk across the entire width of it. And I had asked on whether the bridge, because it's enclosed on 3 sides, creates floor area. and that was not responded to. There's a penthouse shown on the plans, but it's not dimensioned, and since the size of the penthouse went to the value of the project, we should know what the actual dimensions of the penthouse are. And with respect to the Bella Vista test, there's some mention in the statement of facts that there is probably no place to transfer the development rights back in the day in 2004, but in fact that Lot 21 has been vacant since 1973 and privately owned since then. So there was in fact a receiving site, and there's comment that the subdivision of the tax lot was done to allow access to a property on 2nd Street. That's what it would have been for the future development of that lot. So clearly by 2007 there was contemplation to either sell that portion or transfer development rights to Lot 21. And so I have a little trouble in the Bella Vista department about the timing. The only reason that I don't think it really triggers it is because it doesn't seem like if they had sold it, it would have made that much difference in the income.
Right, that's basically it. The financial report goes into details about how there were 11 possible tax lots as receptors, but they bring it down to 4 and then only 2, and I took issue with that. I really didn't find that convincing, but then at least they did do the exercise of what would happen if we had 1,627 square feet of excess rights that we wanted to sell. It just seems to me that they sold it off at the wrong part of the application. They sold it off in the beginning of the application, so it's not part of the site value, and they needed to sell it off at the end of the application after, they built it to add value.
Oh, because it's a vacant lot next door as a...
Well, no, because what they do is they say, well, if we sold it off before we even built, then our zoning lot would be smaller and it would be cheaper, but in reality, you're supposed to do it at the end.
Right.
If we sell it off to make a profit. Still in all, it's minimal because its value when the whole site value was recalculated according to developable feet is only worth $93,000, and it really doesn't make a dent on the return. If you switch it around and sell it at the end, it's like a difference of a 0.1%.
Okay. So that's how they manage it, but it's true that I think there was a contemplation way back, close to then, because there was this vacant lot sitting there for decades, actually, by that point. Okay. All right, anybody else on this?
Okay, new cases, item number 9, 42929BZ, 4801 Kings Highway, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommends conditional approval with 3 abstentions. Their conditions are that the accessory convenience store and drive-through window hours of operation be limited to 6 a.m. to 12 midnight, which is actually what it now says on the application. That the entrance/exit on East 48th Street be eliminated. That was not proposed. And that a 10-foot wall be erected on East 48th Street with landscaping to buffer the sound and pollution, also not proposed by the applicant. The proposed reconfiguration of the lot puts all of the pressure, this is my view, of the drive-through on the adjacent residential property owner, and therefore I want to be sure that residents in the area are notified of this proposal, as notice to neighbors is not usually a requirement for these applications. Clearly, the community board was aware of some of the issues, but it's not clear at all, you never know, who came to the community board hearing, how it was posted, and all of that. So we should have the applicant send notice to all the properties within the 400-foot radius, inviting written comments and attendance at the next hearing. From my point of view, if you were to maintain it in this kind of layout and accept the concept of this, at the very least, the fencing along the shared property line should be acoustical with wood picket behind to conceal it. And the drawings need to make clear what the fences are. At the moment, the zoning lot lines conceal the fencing designation, so you actually can't tell what's a fence, what isn't, or which is which kind of fence. And the site now is in very bad condition, so all the fences need to be replaced. There's a notation that the chain link fence on one side would be retained. Also, Community Board asked that a high fence be constructed, or actually they said a wall, be constructed on 48th Street. That fence should also be acoustical with decorative wood picket, or it should be a wall, which a 10-foot wall may be an issue about what holds up the 10-foot wall. But and then the planting border on 48th Street is too narrow to create the necessary buffer zone. And oddly, the car dealership that's on the other side which is just strewn with cars, is enjoying a much better buffer zone than the residents who live across the street from the site. So, and the existing site has a good planted buffer on 48th Street, which I think should remain with the fence set back from the street line the way it is now, and the planting on the street side. So that way you get a kind of a decorative sound buffer, and then there would be an actual sound and pollution buffer. I also question the curb cut that's from Kings Highway that is cutting across another property. It's an indication there's some kind of what they call a driveway easement. And this is a kind of procedural question. So that property isn't part of the zoning line. There's an easement that they're traversing for the use, but the use is subject to a variance. So how does that work? And the drive-through totally depends on that access point. You must drive over that easement area in order to get to the drive-through for the what sounds like it's going to be a Dunkin' Donuts. Also, when you look at the layout, it looks like the distance between the last car that's at the pump and the access to the queue on the drive-through is very tight. And it seems to me like, since they're really redoing everything, all the pumps should be shifted over to the southwest. That's kind of to the left of the site. And the community board asked that the curb cut on East 48th Street be eliminated. Obviously, they're having issues with the activity of the use in really a residential area on that side. The applicant should look at eliminating that curb cut, because all of the pressure on egress for the convenience store is being placed on that residential frontage, and it could easily all egress to Kings Highway instead. And then there's a lighting illuminance diagram, and there's significant light spill onto 48th Street sidewalk. And I'm not sure that in this case residents would really appreciate it. It's like 7-foot candles on the sidewalk itself at the residential area, and that's a lot. It's different than if it were 0.05 or something. We sometimes see a little spill. And they have mechanicals on the roof that should be concealed by the design of the building and not just put fencing around the mechanicals. And then we need elevation. So they have a landscaping plan that's pretty elaborate, but you need to read each landscaping type to see whether the bushes are low or high. A lot of them are ground cover or 14 inches high. And so in order to understand how that residential property is going to be protected, there should be a future landscaping elevation to show what the height of the landscaping will be up against the residential property line. And then the menu board is approximately 22 feet from the residential property line, and the audio equipment material indicates that the menu board reaches 58 decibels at the residential property line. So they need to provide an acoustical analysis to show that the sound will be adequately buffered by the time it reaches the property of the home, and will not exceed permissible levels at any sensitive receptors, so the windows of that house that's right adjacent. And then finally, we got laid a trip generation analysis, which I found personally to be totally useless. It appears it didn't recognize that there is a curb cut on 48th Street, in the analysis. It didn't consider the impacts of the convenience store operation on the traffic patterns, as far as I could understand. There weren't supporting calculations provided or an explanation on methodology. It was very sort of a cursory throw there. It felt like it was done in 20 minutes. So I'm not sure what it was trying to establish. Others?
With regards to the curb cut that is shared, I was looking at that and the curb cut that you're referring to.
That goes to the easement?
Right. Previously approved plans also show that curb cut. So.
But this curb cut's being shifted over and widened.
I think isn't it shifted away? Or?
No, it's being shifted more onto the easement area.
Okay.
So it was conceivable that you could drive from the existing curb cut onto the property without really relying on the easement, and now it's impossible because they're moving it to the,
I'll look into it.
I think that's the east, southeast.
I think my concern was more with the curb cut that is directly onto that intersection of Avenue H and Kings Highway, because that's a very busy intersection, and how traffic moves out and gets into the flow of traffic was a question I had. I had less concern about the 48th Street, but more of in terms of how it affects the traffic flow on Kings.
So actually,
because there isn't a separate traffic light or anything.
So actually, if we were to get something useful out of the traffic analysis, it really should be how these curb cuts and everything are affecting area, right, what do you call it, the timing on the lights and all of that, how it blends into traffic patterns.
I think a little bit more clearer diagram that shows where the lights are and how the traffic flows. So,
Anybody else?
I had a question of whether or not they could put a layer of the sound attenuating fence along that vinyl fence for additional sound attenuation for the property right behind. And also a request that they break out their signage by frontage, illumination, and non-illumination.
Okay. Anybody else? No? Okay.
Item number 10, 8174BZ, 9727 57th Avenue, Queens.
Okay, we have proof of notice of hearing, but I actually didn't find proof of service of initial application, so we need that. However, we do have a community board recommendation. They recommend approval with 2 opposed, 1 abstention. The applicant requests legalization of the recycling machines and reduction in the number of approved parking spaces. The statement of fact states that the donation bins will be removed, but they're still shown on the proposed plans, and there's a note that says something to the effect of owner will remove at his discretion. I don't really understand that. The recycling machines are at the corner of the site in the most public location. And I'd like to know why they're not up against the wall of the building or closer to the loading dock. When I haven't visited the site, but when I looked at the Google Street View, the machines are very heavily used. In that Street View, there's about 5 people who are standing in line to put bottles and cans and stuff into the machines. So I think it's obviously a good thing that the machines are available. But what it's doing is, because the face of the machines is on the property line, it's expanding the commercial use onto the sidewalk, which really is not what it's supposed to be doing. And in addition, there's this roll-down gate that's next to the machines that's covered in graffiti, and I don't know what the roll-down gate access is. So that's kind of a messy corner. It's got a lot of other things going on that corner. The street view also shows trash storage or something between the fence at the street line and the bins. And that shouldn't occur there. They have
See.
storage elsewhere on the supermarket lot. And just an observation, because they are requesting a reduction in the number of parking spaces that were originally approved, and Google shows every time the parking lot's full. So, others?
I wanted them to do a review of the parking space utilization in the parking lot currently to see if it can handle the reduction in spaces.
This also, in the hearing folder, December 14, 2016, they notified by letter, this is the sort of standard we had back then, where they CC'd all the parties, the community board, the council member, all of that, that there was an application.
All the way at the bottom of the folder.
So in other words, you have proof of service of initial application?
Right, they said
Yeah.
December 14th to Community Board 4, and CCing Melinda Katz, Carl Weisbrod, John Young, and this was from 2016,
Okay,
so,
that counts. It was, yeah.
it's in the hearing folder, it's like the one of
All
the
right, I
last
didn't find it.
documents.
Okay, so we have.
Yeah, that's why I said we had it, so, okay. Number 11, right? Appeals calendar, decision items, item number 11, 2017-68A through 2017-96A, 7 to 9, 49 Terrizzi Loop, and 11 to 16 Rosenon Lane, Staten Island.
Somebody notes on this. The applicant submitted Department of Buildings materials concerning the damage that was done to adjacent properties, including the complaints that were filed with DOB, an email to DOB indicating that revised plans were submitted, and a letter from an engineer signed and sealed promising to design the site to prevent flooding, which is effectively, I promise I'll be good kind of letter. I don't have any more comments on this, so I'd like to just bring this to a vote tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, I got what I'm looking for last hearing, the letter from the civil engineer indicating that the drainage issues is gonna be taken care of. The only thing I knew since the last hearing, I believe for the excavation support, this is a self-certified. I'm not asking for anything else. I'm okay with what I got. But again, I did look at the DUB correspondence, the email and the updated SOE design. And I want to put it on the record one more time. I believe this SOE design need to be looked at by somebody who's have like expertise in designing SOEs. And I'm gonna be more specific, because if something happened to that system during construction, I just want to be like, mentioned it. So the embedment of the pile, this pile, the soldier pile is subject to uplift because of the diagonal brace. So this uplift need to be checked. The whaler need to be designed for biaxial moment. And I don't think this is done based on the whaler section that's being used. The third thing, the whaler need to be welded to every single soldier pile, and I didn't see such note on the SOE. So this is a more specific shot, and I'm okay with the application with respect to the GCL waiver.
Okay, and I just want to clarify that we're not engineering the site, but the responsibility of a professional is when they see an issue, it's their responsibility as a licensed professional, which Commissioner Sheta is, to call out deficiencies. Otherwise, that's just the responsibility.
The reason I'm mentioning these things, because when I spoke to the design last hearing, the response was, DOB looked at this, and it's kind of conveyed to the board that the DOB approved the SOE design. I don't believe this is the case, based on some communications with the DOB. I believe it was self-certified application, including the SOE drawings, and that's why I'm like raising the red flag for the second time.
Okay. Okay. All right.
I think I made an ample record as to my legal and practical issues with this application, and I don't want to take any more time on it.
Okay.
Move on? Continued hearing items, item number 12, 238-15A through 243-15A. This is 102-4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24 Dunton Court, Queens.
Okay. At our last hearing on August 14th, we expressed frustration that the applicant has been unresponsive to our request for additional information. On August 16th, we sent a certified dismissal warning letter to the owner and the applicant advising that failure to respond to our questions from prior hearings may result in a negative decision on November 8th. I don't know whether the owner confirmed receipt of the letter, but the owner should appear at the hearing tomorrow, and obviously the representative. In the ongoing effort to track down the rights to access and maintenance of Dunton Court, some actual research was actually done by the owner's representative, although it isn't a title report because we've been reminded over and over again that a title report would be too expensive. It claims the street, the letter claims the street has been dedicated to the city and/or, according to a comment in a city planning report, it satisfies the GCL 36 requirements and that there are public utilities under it. So I'm curious actually whether the city agrees with this analysis, but question if that is the case, in other words, that it satisfies the GCL waiver. What in the world is it doing before the board after years? It's 2 years. And also, if this is really under city jurisdiction, why is there that crazy curb cut at the entrance that the Department of Transportation would never have permitted, right? So the letter effectively provides no backup for its assumptions. It's really just some research that was able to be done somehow without spending money on a title company, because that's really expensive.
Don't we have a letter from the borough president about the status of the street?
We do, way back.
Yeah.
When?
So
How?
would they?
Yes, that's why the city needs to agree with that. So what the materials say is that there's this case in 1884 or something like that, which is it's similar to, what is it, the dedications of streets or active lights, or remember all those great old cases that tell you about your rights to implied easements and things like that. And it's basically a statement maybe going back to the time of King George or something that says that when a property is conveyed, it's conveyed with street rights, which is true on every deed. It says, and all rights to whatever the rights are of the street in front. But if you don't have any rights, you don't have any rights. So anyway, no idea how, but because there were no backup materials, we can't actually say whether they came to a conclusion that would be accepted by Corporation Council, Borough President, anybody. They also oddly resubmitted this sort of random collection of materials that were submitted in 2 years ago or a year ago.
Well, they wanted to make sure that everything, they were concerned because they were, that you had claimed they had not submitted anything, so they wanted to resubmit everything that they thought.
So what did they do? They just threw a pile of stuff at us without telling us why. So I actually don't know why. I saw 4 owner's authorizations. Usually that's not one of the things that's like top of the analysis. And like almost nothing in that resubmission, other than drawings, was actually relevant to the questions. And they were supposed to have given us a cover letter that answered the questions. And So I'm just going to read again the frustration on August 14th that precipitated sending out a dismissal warning letter. This is a pretty frustrating application. At the last hearing, we were as clear as day and stated our instructions repeatedly. The applicant has to provide us with a cover letter going over and answering every question that we had at the December hearing, June review session, and hearing. It was to supply us with the revised HOA and a new restrictive deck, both of which would address the maintenance of the entirety of Dunton Court roadbed, utilities, and street trees, and commit to the removal of the curb at the head of Dunton Court. There is a note on the drawings about the removal of the curb. I also directed the architect who appeared to have the client's lawyer reach out to the title company's counsel to do a search on the ownership of the roadbed. What we received instead was a set of architectural drawings that show compliance with flood regulations and the correct NAVD datum for design flood elevation, but don't include the full length of Dunton Court on the site plan, show street trees, grass, and planters forward of something called the prolongation line, but within the property line of the development, et cetera. So that's a repeated paragraph for 3 hearings or something like that. So anyway, we've been at this for 2 years.
Well, he did, I have to say, though, he did ask me, and I thought there was enough there, but I did miss the cover letter, and so he did ask me about if there was enough there, but.
But,
yeah.
you know, the applicant, I'm guessing, attends the hearings, listens to the review sessions. This is their responsibility, not yours, right? How many times do you ask for exactly the same thing to clear this up? So I still don't know what the maintenance agreement is. I still don't, you know. So anyway, I think we've been working on the case for too long. 2 years is plenty. So I just want to close it and vote, and everybody votes however they think. And that's that.
All right, item number 13, 2016 4473A, 7274 East 3rd Street, Manhattan.
Okay. At the last hearing, we asked that the applicant verify that all doors are fireproof self-closing and that existing smoke detectors in the building are hardwired. That's throughout the building and all the apartments. If not, these would have to be installed new in the building and shown on the drawings. Instead, we have an affidavit from the unit owner, the one who wants to expand the penthouse, claiming knowledge of the conditions at the other units without actually having inspected them. That obviously isn't satisfactory. Normally, it's done by a licensed professional, not the unit owner, unless he or she happens to be a licensed professional. As to fire-rated doors, the rule is that the rating tag must be visible and readable. So apparently, the unit owner has a readable rating tag, but we don't know whether anybody else does.
That's right.
The self-closers also must be tested and operable, and the smoke detectors must be inspected in each unit. It must be hardwired, and if they aren't, then that work has to show on the plans as new. So, with respect to fire rating of the corridor walls, we had asked, the drawings had indicated that the walls were existing 2-hour fire rated, and I asked, how did the architect come to that conclusion? So the architect said that, provided a copy of 1 page of the 1984 approved plans that show details of that kind of fire rating, but having been in the architect's position way back in those days, where you just drew you had actually these little sticker things with standard details, and you put the sticker things on all your drawings, and that was to satisfy DOB that the project complied. Whether it was built like that is a totally other thing, because the builder mightn't have done. So if I were in this architect's position, I would never rely on details of somebody else's drawings. I'd make a hole in the wall and take a picture of it and show everybody, look, it's got 2 layers of sheetrock and so on. So the architect's reliance on somebody else's drawings it doesn't make me feel good. I wanted to know what the fire department thought about that. So we have a number, actually something like 6 or 8 emails from one of the residents in the building, who's obviously concerned about how this project will affect his own apartment and the costs associated with it, and apparently other residents in the building are similarly concerned. This is really a condo board matter, and not something the BSA can get involved with. It's really, and ultimately, it's up to the condo board to decide whether the project should go ahead or not. So if we, and as was explained to us, the condo board won't review the applicant, let's say the property owners or the property owner's application until they receive a full set of drawings that are submitted to the DOB, right? So the process goes like this, and the condo board president gave permission to file, and that's all we can do, right? So, those are anybody else on this?
Zoning calendar, continued hearings, item number 14, 5602BZ, 317 Day Hill Road, Brooklyn, and item number 15, 196BZ, 600 McDonald Avenue, Brooklyn. You also received a letter from the fire department.
Actually, I didn't see that one, but okay. So this is an ongoing compliance hearing with this case where city planning is working on a rezoning for the site. According to city planning's website that I looked at yesterday, there was a revised EAS submitted in September. The project hasn't yet been certified to go to the community board. City planning is looking at the proposed use as a continuation of an existing use, which I find a little unfortunate, so that has an effect on their analysis. The owner's representative submitted a copy of the EAS dated October 12th to us, October 12th, 2018. I don't know actually whether that's the same one as was submitted in September to city planning. I don't know if there were updates, I actually don't know. They also included an updated parking analysis that concludes, as expected, that the banquet use has no effect on parking conditions in the neighborhood, and pre-event inspection reports show banquet events continuing without concern for legality, or I don't know whether it complies with fire department requirements. What did the fire department letter say?
So the FDNY, they inspected the site on April 9th and on April 12th, and they listed series of violations, including failure to post sign.
April 12th and 9th?
No. This is
Later. No. We had an August hearing on this, so it should be a later fire department letter.
So the fire department, I'm sorry.
There's one, fire department sent a letter November 5th.
Right.
On May 30th, 2018, members of the Public Buildings Unit at the Borough of Fire Prevention conducted a reinspection open violation orders that were previously issued. The result of this reinspection has PBU dismissing all open violation orders previously noted in my letter of April 14, 2018. The licensed public place of assembly, LPPA units, had visited the premises during the evening hours in April, May, and September, but were unable to conduct an inspection because there was no one at the premises at the time of those inspections. All open violations issued by LPPA still remain in effect.
LPPN. A stands for, do we know? That's okay.
I just.
Violations.
Licensed public place of assembly.
Oh, okay.
Yes, thank you.
Right. Reiterating what I said. Keep having the parties, keep inviting, doesn't matter whether, okay. Okay.
Item number 16, 2017-201BZ, 323 Elmwood Avenue, Brooklyn.
The project has been modified to include a setback at the top floor to respond to our comments. The setback is not dimensioned, though, except for the protrusion that is set back 15 feet from the property wall, which itself is set back 10 feet from the property line. So to be clear, they should provide the full dimensions on that setback. The bulkheads, though, are very tall and not composed in the facade, and it seems like their heights could be reduced by taking advantage of the fact that you've got a lower landing in the front. And we recently learned of an elevator type that doesn't have an overrun, or the overrun is so low it hides behind the parapet wall. So I'm curious why not to use that one in this case where the bulkheads are really apparent and kind of really like towers there. The setback shows, quote, no occupancy on it. It's limited like that. And I'd like to know how it'll be regulated because there is a door to get there. And it goes right to the street line. And I know the neighbors are really concerned about noise. And did it also for the roof, which does not have an elevator going to it, but nonetheless, how is the roof going to be regulated? They need to show the finished materials on all of the facades, and need I remind that there's no EFIS permitted on this project. They should show the fencing material. I think it should be metal picket to be in keeping with the residential character of the neighborhood. I see the note about maintaining the fence gate locked at all times, but there's a fence gate from the street on the side, on one side, but I don't see how that actually works to prevent the kids from hanging out in the side yard, because you can get to it from the other side. So if they're really serious about keeping the kids from that side yard, there should be a fence on the other side as well. Because you need to get to the back bike racks. There's also like a little seating area in the rear. And there should be probably some kind of vegetation in the corner there, so of sort of the side rear corner to further protect the residential building. And with respect to the landscaping, they should show the surface materials of the landscaping. And I'd like to know if there's fencing, there's grassy areas in the front, and I don't really know how that works, because you're going to have all of these kids hanging out and standing on the grass unless the grass is fenced, so I'm not really sure what the whole idea of that is. So that's either called dead grass or it's fenced. So yeah, I'm just not really sure what that's about. They also should show more clearly on the drawing, there's this overhang above the front entrance that when I read it on the PDFs is this big black box, and I don't know what it is. So if they could clarify what that is above the door, and also indicate on the drawings the number of bicycles that will be stored in each of the locations. Other comments? No? Yes?
Okay. Item number 17, 2017-217 BZ, 4855 Holland Boulevard, Staten Island.
Almost. Sorry, okay. In response to the board's comments, the building has been reduced to a total of 8,008 zoning square feet and described as having no increase in building height, although existing and proposed heights to the roof aren't provided and need to be. I'd like the architect to attend. Community Board 3 issued a letter in response to the revised proposal recommending denial in spite of the reduction in building size based on inadequate parking being provided to accommodate 18 to 22 staff serving 32 patients. It asked for a parking study, which is not an unreasonable request. 12 new parking spaces are being provided, and there is no cellar expansion. 9 spaces were provided for the original building when the cellar was not counted for the use back in the day before cellars were required to be included in the analysis. The portion of the building designated cellar, to which a floor area exemption applied, appears to now be converted into a basement, which becomes floor area. This special permit maximum is 10,000 zoning square feet. So actually, I think the proposal exceeds what is permissible, unless I'm reading the plans incorrectly, hence a reason for having the architect attend. I'm also not sure how to calculate the parking requirement if the cellar becomes a basement. When you change its designation, so does it now have to meet the standards today, or do you grandparent in a cellar, even though it's no longer a cellar? So I'm really confused. I don't know how DOB would handle that. The drawings also appear to show a change in the roof line of the existing building. The existing building reads as if it's a one-story with cellar, and the renovated building reads as if it's 2 stories. So I think they're actually lifting everything, which isn't as to say that they shouldn't be, but we need to understand what's happening. And we do have a problem if it's exceeding 10,000 square feet. The revised statement of facts states that the area lot coverage for the project is 39%, and the neighborhood coverage average is 27%, and the planted area at the site is 41%, and area average is 36%. But I didn't actually see any updates in the studies that we received in May that included the site itself and skewed the numbers. So we had commented about that the prior study included the site, which only has 1 building on a large lot, so it kind of skews the numbers about what our average is, and there was no update on those studies. Also, we always sort of forget that there's this radio tower sitting on the site, and it's not shown on any of the drawings. And we talked about it at the last hearing, that the radio tower has to go. It's apparently there's a lease that goes until 2021. So it seems to me that it's removed, and I understand you have a lease, so you can't break the lease without a penalty probably. But the lease should not be allowed to be renewed. It's really an eyesore, actually, and the site is getting this big building on it.
So are they waiting until August 2021 to
Build
take
the
the
building?
tower down and then build the building? Or are they building it around it? It wasn't clear where
Yeah.
the tower sits in the front of the building.
Yeah, well, they didn't show it at all on the drawing.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't exist, and it's got a kind of a fencing or a wall around it. So makes construction on the site quite difficult, not to mention that you can't damage the tower while you're building this new building. So, and then we asked at the prior hearing them to demonstrate that the open parking area complies with section 37-90. I didn't find that. Now there's a lot of planting, so it probably does, and there's less parking on the site generally, but they need to demonstrate that it
From
complies.
the elevation, it seemed like there's some wall, kind of like a treatment along the frontage.
A wall treatment, what do you mean?
It's
Like to enclose the
It's
parking.
enclosed,
So
it's an enclosed
you can't
parking.
see the cars
Yes,
from the street
right.
now.
So now all the cars seem to be under the building.
Right.
Right, before they were spread out all over the lot.
And
So
the
there,
building was lifted.
yeah, so, well, the building is still lifted, so the
But it
parking.
doesn't appear that way because now the structure,
Right,
that-
yes,
that's-
yeah. But so there's the lot coverage of the building under which some cars are, right? And then there's parking in the front, on one of the fronts, that was there before. And it seems as if they're just not spreading the parking out quite as much as they did before, but they still have roadways, which goes to this 3790 analysis. So they need to at least demonstrate that it complies. And then there's landscaping adjacent to the residential properties, but they need to be dense, high hedges, and I didn't see that that's what the specs called for.
They never put any landscaping adjacent to Allen Places.
No, the
home.
one on
Right,
the
just
top,
on
right,
the other
on the
side.
side.
They could also extend it to the Allen Place. They have enough room, so I don't know why they don't just put some landscaping there as a gesture to that owner. Especially since that owner has a pool in their backyard and clearly enjoys their backyard.
Right.
So it'd be nice if it was a little quiet.
Allen is, yeah, that's what, okay, so. And then the exterior building materials, there's a kind of a conflict in the materials about what they are. So they're indicated on the elevations as scored stucco, and we asked at the last hearing how that relates to the neighborhood because it was described both on the renderings and in the statement of facts as going to be brick. And there's this base, which is an unknown material, kind of looks like, and then the way the drawings imply that the building will be this homogeneous result. but the existing building has this kind of rusticated block on it. So the question is, are they going to be recladding the exterior of the existing building? You know, because that's part of what's been represented to us, and what the community was so concerned about is that it shouldn't look like a sort of a commercial building with another thing attached to it. It should look like a residential building, and if you leave the medical building as it is, it will look like this kind of blob, this thing attached to it that won't make sense. They're changing the fenestration, for example. They're changing the floor-to-floor heights in the existing building, but are they recladding the existing building? And I think that was it. Yeah. Anybody else?
No, I thought the revised plan was significantly better than what we had originally, and it does address some of the findings that we typically look for. You know, the building being of a lower height, it would address more of the light and air, and the bulk distribution that has been done. It is more in keeping with the residential, not putting aside the questions that you have asked for clarification. As it is, the existing building has quite a healthy amount of landscaping. If they continue with that same treatment, furthermore, I think it is a significant improvement and would be much more than what the abutting residential buildings provide in terms of the open space. So yeah, I think this is in the right direction in terms of the site plan.
No, they made a lot of progress, because it was at a point where we're like, really? It's a hospital in the middle of a residential
No, it doesn't appear.
neighborhood.
I mean, the way the treatment has been done, it really does blend in with the residential.
Yes.
So they're making an extensive effort.
Yes, and in particular, the massing of setting back the connection between the existing building and the new, to have it read as much as possible as two buildings.
Right.
They could enhance that, actually, by having
Different
more
material
dense.
or something.
No, well, actually, if it was a glass connector,
Yeah.
that would be the way to really play down the massing of the building, or just a lot of landscaping in front of the setback area, so that, you know, basically, from the street, you'd be seeing tall evergreens or something like that, would be one way of reinforcing that. But that's probably the place where the radio thing is.
This location.
Yeah, that little setback
Probably.
area may be where the radio tower is, and
I
don't
also
know.
thought from programmatically, the description that they provided and the layout fits much better
Yeah.
than the previous one. So this is a very
Yes.
well laid out programmatically.
Right.
And a
They've
neat
reduced the number of
Yeah.
exam rooms significantly. They're making use now of the cellar, which they weren't using before, which may be one reason why they're turning it into a basement. But then that may be part of their downfall in terms of the size of the expansion, because we must stay at the 10,000 square foot level.
While I appreciate what they did with the reducing the building height and their new plans, I still think that there is a real parking issue for that neighborhood, and I think the community board certainly has a valid concern with regard to parking, and because of, from the last hearing, which I believe was in May, we spoke about how much this is going, the utilities going up in this location, and none of that really was addressed of how they won't need that parking. So I really support a parking study on it.
Okay. Right, I think. Did they? No, they never provided a parking. We talked a lot about how many doctors and how many patients, but we never did like a trip gen. We never.
And there was a little bit of back and forth how they said it's going to stay the same, but they need bigger places, and they're not going to have as much the parking is not going to be as stressed. It just wasn't really. I wasn't convinced by it.
Okay. Yeah, I do think that obviously in this area, you need to have adequate parking. I'm not exactly sure. So what they're doing, so this is part of the question, is they're providing the amount of parking required by zoning, which is normally what we look at, right? Except zoning didn't require the cellar to be counted in the analysis, even though there was an active medical use in the cellar, because at the time the building was built, that was what the zoning regulations were. Now, today, you would have to count the cellar in a medical office. So, once the cellar becomes a basement, even under the old regulations, you would have had to provide parking for that floor area, right? So that part's the thing that I don't know what happens to. And arguably, you need to provide parking for that, in which case there are not enough spaces, and maybe valet parking is the solution there, right? Because right now it's self-park. And it would totally work with valet parking. I think there's plenty of room for that, even though it wouldn't necessarily be the greatest looking. Okay. Yeah.
Item number 18, 2017-291 BZ, 1367 East 26th Street, Brooklyn. And item number 19, 2017-292 BZ, 1363 East 26th Street, Brooklyn.
This is two cases because at one point it was two separate homeowners, and now it's one homeowner who owns both, or will be, or about maybe.
Well, the second case,
yeah,
it's sort of
will
like
be
on the holds until we
Yes.
figure, yeah, because it's a semi-attached.
Right, semi-attached, but the owner of one of the properties is buying the other side.
Right, and building their racquetball court.
So, right, so the project has been revised, as we discussed, to clarify retention of existing materials. However, the calculations are done opposite, and I've had this issue with this architect or engineer several times. We want to know how much material has been retained, not how much material has been removed. And the calculations only show removal, not retention. So the percentage needs to show retention. There's also introduced into this project a new concept of retaining a wall by moving it. So you keep the wall and then you slide it to your desired spot. First of all, I don't actually believe that would be done in the construction site, because it's kind of ridiculous unless you've got one of those balloon frame buildings where the whole thing came sort of on a truck and then the wall went up. But in addition to that, according to that concept, you could totally demolish a building for one of these special permits and move all the walls out to wherever you want, to the ultimate goal, right? And basically start all over from scratch. So my answer is no. That's like completely changing the point. We need to have an existing building that we retain, and so sliding the wall out 8 feet to 10, I think it's like 8 or 10 feet out.
Is that
from where
because
it was.
it's the two buildings? Is that?
No. It's because the front wall, the designer wants the front wall to be further forward. So taking the front wall and sliding it further forward is being argued as the way to say, I'm retaining the perimeter walls on the perimeter. So they need to provide the calculations of the exterior wall retention without the wall being relocated. If they want to tear that wall down and it still counts toward the 50%, good. If it doesn't, then it needs to be redesigned. What's funny about this is when it was two semi-attached houses, there was no issue about retention of existing materials, right? Now the house is twice the size, and now it's being blown out on all sides, and it's hard to retain the existing materials. So it's kind of working against interest. House
Right,
is
and
twice the size.
And that's because of the party wall
Yeah.
is the one that's kind of making the numbers not work. Because the semi-detached, the party wall counted for both of them. In this case, now the party wall.
But but in the prior version, they weren't moving the front and the back walls. They were only moving the back walls.
I have to go back
Yeah.
to the original.
So I need to, it doesn't really matter because we're just looking at this one. Let's see. Yeah, okay, it doesn't matter, but, So that's the problem. And otherwise, the project has been modified to reduce the height and amount of floor area as requested. But this is a much bigger ask than it was when it was 2 houses. And that's part of what's making the problem. Okay.
I think in the original proposed, yeah, they had new front walls and new rear walls. Yeah, the original proposal also had new front and new rear.
But it was keeping both sides.
It was keeping.
And that's
Yeah.
why it didn't look as bad.
Right.
So now they're removing that party wall.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no, there's nothing but the record.
Okay.
Alrighty. Item number 20, 2017-298 BZ, 14 White Street, Manhattan.
Scrolling, yeah. Okay. The project was revised to eliminate the parking spaces at the second floor, hence improving the layout at that floor. So now there's no parking waiver requested, but there are still 2 parking spaces in the building. There's an explanation for why the as-of-right layout at the ground floor is worse than the proposed layout, stating that the awkward plan is due to the as-of-right curb cut location. However, without any parking at all, such a waiver wouldn't be needed, and the floor plan at the first floor would be improved, better retail area. So to my mind, the design is a marketing decision, and it's driving the waiver. The marketing decision being the desirability to be able to sell 2 parking spaces. In any event, they did value the parking spaces to $500,000 each at least, so at least that's more in line with what we've been seeing in terms of sales. I'm just going to summarize what was submitted on the structural without commenting on what they said. So there's a report from the structural engineer, and I say this in some way to give information to other applicants about what we're receiving when we want fuller information. So there's a report from the structural engineer that is responding to Commissioner Sheta's comments about mini caissons versus mini piles and the associated costs with them. These include actual proposals from construction contractors, supportive engineering and monitoring drawings, a foundation plan for the as-of-right building, including building load analysis and a detailed written analysis from the supportive excavation and geotech engineers, along with a letter from the noise and vibration consultant. Other adjustments to the cost estimates were also made in response to Commissioner Sheta's comments. And I want to add that sometimes the adjustments stated that the applicant agreed with Commissioner Sheta's comments, and therefore they were either removing a cost or reducing a cost. Whether or not it's the right cost is another subject. According to this last submission, the premium costs between an unburdened site and this one are claimed to be $1.67 million. The ask remains nearly 1 FAR above the as-of-right, a curb cut, and a setback waiver. Approximately 500 square feet is deducted from zoning floor area for that parking garage access. Cost estimates show there is no difference in income without the curb cut waiver, so there's no case at all for the curb cut waiver. There's a 6.4% return claimed on the proposed without the curb cut waiver, and I wonder actually whether further reduction of the requested floor area increase should be considered, just because if we just accepted all of their assumptions, we're on the higher side than on many projects that we look at. In comparing the as-of-right income to the proposed, the cost per square foot in the different scenarios isn't matching, which it should be, because the layouts are basically identical, especially on the south side of the building, where the proposed has balconies, but the as-of-right doesn't. So those should be identical, right?
You mean the income, not the cost, right?
No, I mean
income per
the
square foot, the
income-
sales price.
The
per
sales
square
price
foot.
per square
Yeah.
foot. Because, I could see, all right, this one's a little bit more valuable because it has a balcony or something like
But
that.
that's added, the outdoor space is added in after the fact, and
Ah.
there's still a deviation on the indoor space, which isn't explained.
Okay. So I hand it to you or Commissioner Shades to take it from there. But I actually think that if we compare this to the Franklin Street site, which only asked for setback waivers, a terrible site. No question it was a burden site. And this one, I'm not sure how burdened it is. I'm not really getting the one FAR waiver request. Go.
Commissioner Sheta goes first.
I could go ahead and, okay, so last hearing, we debated the pile numbers and the pile type. They were proposing caissons. We indicated that many piles or micro piles, they are the same, could be used. On this submission, they agreed that, the last submission said if they want to use many piles, the capacity of the pile, capacity means how much load the pile can take, they indicated that it's about 150 tons. And during the hearing, actually, we walked the structure engineer and the geotechnical engineer on how to get the number of piles. And the number of piles was about 19, if I recall. The number of caissons was about 33, noting that the one caisson can take 400 tons, while a mini pile can take 150. That was like a huge difference in the carrying capacity of the foundation system. During the last hearing, the geotechnical engineer argued that the 150 ton per mini pile is an approximate. My response to that was, you said it's on order of. In the engineering world, on order of means it could be 155 or 160 or 145 or 140. And I kind of made it clear to him that do not, please, if you want to submit calculations, do not go like very low. And that's exactly what happened. The submitted capacity for the mini pile that was submitted before as on the order of 150 ton. On this submission, it's 90 tons to 120 ton. And they submitted calculations. I got some sort of calculations. These calculations, I have the following comments on it. Number one, the calculations were based on tables that are used for anchors, tiebacks. Tieback is kind of a wire system that when we have a retaining wall, we put that wire system into ground and then we pre-stress it and we tighten a knot at the end so it can hold the retaining wall in place. And that table was described as it could be used for small diameter tiebacks. So it's not for pipes. This is comment number one. Comment number two is the material, the subsurface material itself. The subsurface material in the geotechnical report prepared by the same geotechnical engineer who prepared the calculations for the mini pile was described as glacial material. The material picked based on which the resistance of the ground was picked from that ground anchor table was silty, sandy material. Although the table, the same exact table, has a kind of ground resistance for glacial depth. The ground includes significant amount of gravel. I went over the grading analysis that submitted this time and the other two charts that were submitted with the geotechnical report. The material contains 15 to 25% of gravel according to the ASTM specifications. This material is classified as sand with gravel. If you look at the table, again, based on which the ground resistance was picked for sand with gravel or for glacial till, if you take that unit resistance for the surrounding ground for that pile and you evaluate the pile capacity for this mini pile, I would claim that it would exceed 150 tons. So it cannot be 90, it cannot be 120. If you consider the real skin friction for this kind of ground, it's gonna take you above 150. I believe the 150 number in the last submission was actually a conservative number. That pile size is 13.75 inch diameter. I have installed a very similar, actually the same exact diameter pile, the other side of the river. It's like a mile from here. And we loaded this pile, real load. It's not just a piece of calculation on a piece of paper. We loaded this pile to 500 ton until it failed. So in the engineering world, if you load something to failure and it carry 500 tons, if you take safety factor of 2, this pile can take 250 ton. Considering the difference in the subsurface and these kind of factors, I believe this pile can easily take 150 ton. If it's installed and loaded, probably it can take more than that. So downgrading the pile capacity is not what I'm gonna accept. So this is one thing. And if we correct the pile capacity, the number of pile goes down. So this is the first item that participated in increasing the number of piles. The number of piles in this submission is not 19, which we calculated last hearing. It's not even 33, which I said go ahead and take 33, same number of caissons, and I'm okay with that. It's not 19, it's not 33, it's 52 because of the 90 ton to 120 ton pile capacity, which is, I said, downgraded. The second item in the foundation plan shows that the structural engineer, who did, by the way, a very good job in explaining about the loads, and by the way, we got 2 different submissions, or 3 different submissions. We got loading analysis from the structural engineer, we got geotechnical analysis from the geotech, and we got a report with respect to the vibration isolation. I'm gonna get to this in a moment. But with respect to the foundation system, they are still using a mat foundation.
Which they?
The structural engineer. The structural engineer is still using a mat foundation. It's 18-inch thick mat, and with pile foundation, you could use either a mat foundation and you put piles wherever, or you could use small pile caps similar to the spread footings, and you put the piles underneath each column. Of course, engineering systems are not done, but engineers know how to play games. If you use mat foundation, the gift you get, because the mat foundation contains much more concrete than isolated pile cap, the gift you get with the mat foundation is you add up all the column loads and you divide by the pile capacity. You have to round up the number of piles just one time. By saying round up, meaning, let's say we have a column that its load is 101 ton, and we're using 100 ton pile capacity. If I'm the engineer designing the pile cap for this column, it's 101 divided by 100, it's 1.01 piles. I cannot put 1.01 piles, so I'm gonna sacrifice and put 2 piles. So this is waste. With a mat foundation, if I wanna get rid of that, like rounding up, I could use mat foundation, add up all the column loads. So it's, let's say the building weight is 1,000 ton, divide this by 100, it's 10 piles, or even if it's 10.5, I take this to 11. So I'm rounding up one time. With the pile caps, you round up for every single pile cap. So it's more waste on the pile, especially when the pile capacity is not appropriate or is not optimized. So this is what happened here. We are using mat foundation. The structural engineer is using mat foundation, but he's rounding up at every single column location, like he's designing separate pile caps. And actually, he showed in the foundation plan dashed line around columns that indicate that this is a separated pile cap system. It's not an integrated mat foundation. So please, conceptual wise, if you want to use mat foundation 18-inch thick, I'm okay with that, but the rounding should be done once. This will take the number of piles significantly down, probably to less than 30. So this is the other thing that's contributing to the increase of the number of piles. And this is the pile issue. The capacity shouldn't be less than 150. It was submitted before. We got this signed from the geotechnical engineer of record of that project. And Mr. Structural Engineer, if you want to use mat foundation, please, no rounding at every single column location. If you want to use this concept, please, forget about the 18-inch thick mat, use 6-inch thick structural slab, which is going to save some concrete, and use separate pile caps, isolated pile caps. I'm okay with either approach. The second item is the excavation support. For the excavation support, there is the excavation support, by the way, and as we mentioned 2 hearings ago, my opinion was the excavation support for this site, for the typical, is going to cost less than the excavation support for for the existing site. Is going to cost less than a typical site. And we're getting this conclusion in this submission. But to close the gap, because the cost is going down, to close the gap, I see that 4 feet by 4 feet by about 12 feet high, what's called concrete buttons, are used. And this is huge amount of concrete. And you know what? Let's add some rebar to that. This is a reinforced concrete. What is the unit price for the reinforced concrete? It's $1,500. $1,500 for 4 feet by 4 feet with some few rebar in it, and this rebar is not needed. I want to get explanations from whoever designed these concrete buttons. Why do they need rebar? We usually actually, when we use these concrete buttons, there is something called, excuse my expression, it's called mafia blocks. These mafia blocks, it's a concrete blocks. They put them on top of each other. They have no reinforcement in it. And they could hold the lagging behind, and they do the job. In this project, this concrete buttons with the rebar in it take the cost by about $56,000 up just for the excavation support. So instead of we get 150,000 reduction in the SOE cost, no, now we're just getting like 100 or 90,000. Again, this is not gonna fly.
But that's not a big number. That's $50,000 here.
It adds up. Yes, I agree, $50,000 is not a big deal, but if you have 50 here and 50 there and you add these up, it's significant. The third item is the foundation system. The difference between the foundation system for the typical site and for the actual site. I discussed with the structural engineer last hearing, and he agreed that for a typical site, they would need a mat foundation that's 30-inch thick. But for the actual site, the mat foundation is 18-inch thick. So it should be a difference in the concrete quantity for the foundation system between the typical and the actual. The actual should be less, so it should be a reduction on that. If you look at the table, the comparison between the typical site and the actual site, and you look at the mat foundation quantity, it's 211 cubic yard, 211 cubic yard. Yes, for the actual site, it should be 211. I did check that number. But for the other guy, for the typical site, the thickness is not 18-inch. The thickness is 30-inch. So it should be almost double. Again, this is going to take the cost down by something. The MTA cost, the filing cost with the TMA, with the MTA, which we indicated that it was like $250, not $50,000 was taken off. Thank you for that. But still, the daily rate for the TA engineer is $1,000. I did talk to the TA to check whether they changed this or not. It's $900. It's not $1,000. This adds up. And for the seismograph monitoring, if you look at the table, the rate for the person who's gonna read the seismograph is $1,400 a day. I know professional engineers and engineering companies in the city that charges for the professional engineer less than $1,000 per day. So you're telling me that you're gonna get a very qualified professional engineer to just read a seismograph? I used to send an engineering intern to read the seismograph, not even an engineer or a technician. So the rate for this should be cut into half. It should be no more than $700 a day, and this is even like generous. And the number of days is 132 days. I'm not sure why do we need 132. Pile installation, building the mat foundation or the pile cap system, plus the foundation wall is not gonna take 132 days. It should be, if you consider like 3 months for a project like this is more than enough. And again, this is based on discussions with the TA people, how much they charged and how long similar projects taken to like get to the finish line for the foundation system. The vibration isolation thing. Last hearing, I said this building is on pile foundation. I know that the TA is adjacent, but when the TA pass, that train pass, the ground that's gonna vibrate, and this is not even engineering, this is common sense. The ground that's gonna vibrate is the ground mass that's adjacent to the tunnel, which is probably 15 to 25 feet below the sidewalk. This part of the ground is gonna vibrate because it's adjacent to the tunnel. Understood? But the building is not bearing on this material. The building is bearing on piles that are extending to 60 feet below the sidewalk or 50 feet below the sidewalk. So this is a pile supported building. It's not gonna suffer any vibrations because of that train passes. And what I got this submission is something interesting. A study that claims that a piece of rod, steel rod, was driven into ground and a seismograph was like installed to that rod. And they monitored the vibration to that rod. My response to this, number one, measuring the vibrations for this piece of steel is like measuring the vibrations that's coming from the traffic and the train. You didn't show me that you isolated these two components. This is one thing. Number two, your measurements are taken at the top of the existing grade or at the existing grade level. The building will be probably 12 feet below grade. This is number two. Number three, the vibrating object. When you vibrate something, let's say somebody is standing on top of this table and somebody is vibrating this table. If a guy who's like 100 pound heavy and another guy that's 300 pound heavy, they are not gonna vibrate the same. The rod is totally different from a building, so the building mass itself plays an important role here. And more important, you're measuring the ground vibrations. Again, the building is going to be supported on piles, and you know what? The top 20 feet of the pile will be cased with a steel casing. It's an MTA requirement that no force is transmitted from the ground mass to the casing or from the casing to the ground mass. This is a TA requirement. It's kind of, you're isolating this pile at the top 20 or 25 feet. So actually, your vibration isolation is there, but it's the pile casing itself. They didn't get this. And instead, they submitted that kind of report that still insists that vibration isolation is needed. I don't think it is. This is my opinion. I'm not convinced. If you believe you could install the vibration isolation, but I'm not, don't count it in the cost, like we said before. I'm gonna move to the cost estimate now. So generally, I have differences when it comes to the difference between the typical site and the actual site. Cost reduction. That reduction could be on the order of 750 grand to $1 million. So the number the chair mentioned is the 1.6 or 1.7 million. Actually, this number could be either 1 million or even like $750,000. But let's put this aside and let's move to the cost estimate. For the third hearing in row, we've asked the applicant to give us details for the quantity. No single word on that. Nothing in the submission. And you know what? I did look at some items. The foundation walls. The quantity for the foundation walls is submitted to be 211 cubic yard. It's not rocket science. The perimeter for this side is 300 foot, more or less. 300 times 10 feet. That's 3,000 square feet. 1 foot thick, that's 3,000 cubic foot. Divide this by 27. Let's make it easy. Divide it by 30. 3,000 divided by 30 is 100 cubic yard. Look at this. 100, it should be the quantity. The submitted quantity is 211. Almost twice. So I need explain the 211 to me. Show up tomorrow, convince me with the 211, I'll take it. Same thing goes for the excavation. Same thing goes for the superstructure concrete. And this is the bump sheet. The superstructure concrete element is the price is $70 per square foot. And this superstructure is going to be a very regular flat plate, 8-inch thick concrete slab. If you take the $70 per square foot and try to back calculate the price for the cubic yard of the concrete for the superstructure, it's $2,800 per cubic yard. $2,800, the prevailing price for superstructure concrete in the city, of course for buildings. I'm not talking about a guy who's willing to build a 4 feet by 4 feet piece. I'm talking about a developer who's building a 4,000 square foot, 5-story building. The price for concrete is $750 per cubic yard. It's $1/4. So if you just take the $70 per square foot and get the $1/4 of this, it's 17.5. Let's say it's 25, not 17.5, $25, which is, again, more than generous. 25 leaves you with 45 extra for every single square foot. If you take that $45 and multiply it by the square footage for all floors, this is $1.5 million by itself. So add 1.5 million to the difference from between the typical and the actual side. When you add up these numbers and then move to the income side, the income point, the income for the as of right was about $215 per square foot less than the proposed. If you take just that part of the income and you correct this 215 and you multiply it by the square footage just for the residential, this is 3 million plus. So if you're claiming now that your return is on the negative side and it's about negative 500,000, I would say if you consider the income, if you consider the concrete for the skeleton, for that superstructure, if you consider the $50,000 from here plus 60,000 from, if you add these up, actually your as of right project is more than feasible. And looking at the proposed, again, they are asking for a full floor as a waiver. It's not, I don't think this is not gonna fly. Insisting on this project as it's proposed right now, I don't think we're gonna move forward. So if I don't get tomorrow, I don't get like very decisive answers to my concerns, I'm not convinced, and I'm gonna ask the board to vote on this and move forward.
Okay, thank you.
He said it all. There's nothing more for me to say.
You agree with the costs and the income issues?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So what so without having the same technical level expertise, my sort of gut reaction was also that because, again, comparing it to a site that's incredibly burdened, the Franklin Street project, where they couldn't even put a park bench on that site, right? And all they asked for were height and setback waivers. So in this case, you look at it and you say, okay, the building is let's say, arguably more valuable with the setback waivers because you get these balconies, these stepping balconies, right? That should offset any potential difficulty with that's caused by the proximity to the subway. Whereas an entire one FAR waiver, by the way, you know, they're using that 500 square feet that they get from the parking to move to the top. And they're using those setbacks so that they move floor areas to the top, which I get because the units are more valuable at the top with a view, with a nice balcony. So it seems to me the same waiver would be adequate to offset any perceived hardship from proximity to the subway. And the board is pretty consistently, when it sees projects that are very close to the subway like this, has given waivers, but you can see from Franklin, they're not extreme waivers. They're certainly not one FAR. We did have a project which may be one with the vibration was really an issue on Bond Street in Brooklyn. Do you remember there was a hotel right on top of the subway tunnel?
Yes.
Right?
I did actually, I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
But I did actually call one of my friends. He's a structural engineer. He designs these kind of like vibrating things. I do have a very strong, my PhD was structural PhD, but I didn't design that much when it comes to vibrating buildings. And I did ask him, please think about how many buildings you need. He said, yeah, it was one building that was on top of an existing subway tunnel. Yes, if you have the building on top of the tunnel and it's bearing on the ground on top of that tunnel and the tunnel vibrates, of course, the building will vibrate. But this is not the case here. And the cost associated with the isolation is 300,000. Come on.
Okay.
It's not going to work that way. And one thing I thought about yesterday was the zoning resolution clause itself that talks about granting something when somebody has a hardship. Not every unique site is qualified for a grant, for a variance. Because sometimes you could have a uniqueness, but this uniqueness is not causing you a hardship. It's not imposing a hardship. Doesn't mean if you don't have the subway, your site will cost less. It doesn't mean that. Hardship means you're not able to realize feasible return. And I believe this is not the case on this side. At least the return is not negative. It could, yes, it could be not 6% or 7%. It could be. But in order to tackle this, do you need to ask for 25%, one FAR, to manifest this? I don't think this is the case.
Also, all the assumptions have to be made accurate so we can get a real read as to what the potential return is. And we are not there either on the cost side or on the income side.
Okay. So, and in terms of direction for the applicant, we've had this on a couple of other cases, where on the case on 19th Street, where we just narrowed the waiver to the minimum, which was in that case the rear yard, right, instead of height. So in this case, we could just say we're narrowing the waiver to setbacks, and if that seemed to work out, but at the moment, we don't have the...
It might not be warranted
It
yet.
might not be warranted, okay. Okay, thank you.
Move on? Item number 21, 2017-321BZ, 560 West 33rd Street, Manhattan.
Okay. The only thing that was missing was the findings for the rooftop use with the PCE, and they provided that.
Item number 22, 2018-1BZ, 11-02 37th Avenue, Queens. We received a letter on the 5th. They're doing an E-designation, I believe, right?
We received a, what?
They submitted, the applicant submitted revised plans and a final EAS with all the sign-offs, and the plans on the EAS reflect the E designation for hazmat, and there's a note on the plans acknowledging that.
Right, that was just submitted on Monday.
Yes.
Right, okay. So the project was modified to increase the provided on-site parking to 64 spaces, where there had been 55 proposed before, 109 are required. And they did that by increasing the floor-to-floor heights to allow for quadruple stackers in most locations. They applied also the standards for the number of, for office workers, for just a standard generic office building, which we asked them to do because this building will endure maybe past the time when the particular user is there. So they revised the parking study, which estimates a total of 122 workers with a parking demand based on modal splits of 60% auto. So that ends up with a requirement for 40 spaces for employees only. And I ask on that standard office version, well, what about visitors to a standard office? They don't have any calculations for that. For the specific proposed black car use, the study indicates that 50 spaces would be required at a time on those Wednesdays when classes are offered during the day. The modal split, though, for this use is 45% who are going to be driving cars instead of 60% for the standard office. So I understand that they took a poll, but I don't really understand how there can be that much of a discrepancy between what the sort of census tract data provides for and what the actual employees at the current location, which is actually Manhattan, provides for.
Well, so they've been operating in Manhattan for quite some time, and they certainly haven't had any parking there.
Right.
So I gave big credit that their employees generally use a different way to get to work as the same employees who are parking, these are the same employees that are working in Manhattan now. So
But Manhattan has great public transportation right next to it, and this is almost I forget what it is, almost a mile away from the nearest subway. It's far to the nearest subway. So you can't assume the same kind of behavior. And what they're also saying is, for the classes, they're assuming, I think it was 94% of the students in the classes will drive to the site, whereas they don't currently at that rate.
Okay.
So they upped that, but they didn't, they stayed at a low modal split for driving for the staff. And at so the part that I'm not understanding, and this is really something that Philip Habib's office just needs to clarify, is how can you use a modal split that's 60 for the standard office, but only 45% for the proposed use? It's same census tract, so then why? And then the other part that I really need to understand is they say that 94% of the students who go to class will drive, and that there are 32 students in the class. 45% of the 75 employees will drive. So when I do that math, I get 64 spaces needed, because the math wasn't done for us. And I do see that there's an assumption of carpooling at a rate of either 1.3 or 1.4 persons per car. And I'm just wondering whether that's updated data. Is that the case that people really carpool like that to work and so on? I just don't have any answer on that. And the reason why I keep digging is because the community is so worried about the parking situation here. And so to make sure that we're checking all the corners and making sure that the analysis is correct. And, okay, those were my comments. Others?
I think they have two sites. There's one in Wall Street and there's the other one very close to this site.
Yeah.
So it would be helpful if tomorrow the applicant can clarify which side they were basing the numbers off. Because if they're basing the numbers off of Crescent, then I think that there's more
right.
resemblance to this site, and that's kind of what I thought they had done, but
Right.
I would like clarification on that. Now, in terms of the analysis that they did another on-street parking analysis, and the numbers bear out very similar to what was done before, which is very helpful, which further clarifies, in terms of the capacity. And it is true that the parking there, the area is changing. There is more residential use that's coming in, and that demand really picks up after work when people are returning home. So given that this operation is going to be before that, it's going to be either, the only time is Saturday and the other one would be Wednesday till 5 o'clock or something like that.
Right.
So the possibility of that overlap is less. So
that makes sense, that part. Yeah.
So that part was helpful. So it's now only the question is, where is that? Did they use the Crescent Street site as a base? I think in terms of otherwise, trying to provide more parking spaces on site definitely helps. And they're also going to take away some more curb cuts from their site. So that adds to more on-street parking.
Yes, yeah. But there was one comment from the person who came, Mr. Gonzalez, who came to give testimony, who said there were a lot of hotels now built in the immediate area.
Okay, so can I just add to that?
So that's, so
I live in that neighborhood, and there are hotels that are coming up, and these are not the hotels where mostly people drive. These are very much hotels where people are being driven to by Uber or taxis, and so I do not believe the parking is being generated by. There is drop-off pickup happening, but I do not think people are driving there, parking their car. It's a lot of European tourists that are coming, and from what we read from tourism magazines and how the good part of them rely on the mass transit system as much as they can, or they will take taxis. So I'm not sure the parking part is associated with the.
Okay, but so since we have a parking expert who was the consultant, I think they should speak to that.
Absolutely, I agree.
As opposed to sort of anecdotal.
Right. I'm just going by what I see in my neighborhood.
Right, and so that's the thing is, he's experiencing these things. He obviously has real concerns about how he operates his business and is making assumptions that the cause is the hotels, for example. So, but at the same time, there's now 2 separate dates of collections of on-street parking data agreeing that the evening times near the residential areas start to fill up. So, and that it's tight, right, at that time, so, okay.
Move on. Item number 23, 2018 4BZ, 2213 East 13th Street, Brooklyn.
So the building height and roof slope were reduced somewhat, which is what we requested, and the requested FAR is now 1.24, brought down from 1.3, in a .75 FAR zone that also has a point not allows up to 1.27. Oh, I had 1.24. Okay, well, it's what it
now
is.
1.24. It was 1.27 in August.
Yeah, it went from 1.3 to 1.27, now it's 1.24, and this is an area that allows up to 0.9 with the attic bonus.
Thank you.
Okay. Nope.
Sorry, I was waiting for.
Okay.
Item number 24, 2018 7BZ, 291 Avenue W, Brooklyn. We're still waiting for a BSA zoning analysis form.
Oh.
Yeah, we just asked them to do that on Monday, so we don't have the money.
Okay. We also asked for a survey we didn't get. So I need a little bit of walk through what was submitted. I didn't see much change to the building, other than that side yard depth continuity that we discussed to keep it continuous at 3 feet. And then there's this 3-foot setback at the second floor. My comments the last hearing were that the house was massive for the neighborhood, and I didn't see further discussion about why it isn't, or how you justify the 23-foot depth at the rear yard on the second floor when you have complying lots adjacent. The revised statement of facts didn't discuss this at all. For me, the issue is always the immediate surrounding rear yards and not sort of this generalization about what happens on the block. I don't find those arguments helpful at all where it says the block has many rear yards that are less than 30 feet. That doesn't help me because we're asking for a 20-foot rear yard, so you need to be very specific. It has this many that are 20 feet or less. And there's this many that are 20 feet or less in the immediate relation to the site. That's what would help me. Otherwise, I read that and I don't get anywhere. I need to go look at the plan myself, the sort of figure ground, and figure it out myself. I still don't know what the height of the adjacent property is that has a deep site, but I do. There's a rendering that shows it's a one-story building. So, and the rendering, frankly, used to do renderings. Renderings have all sorts of benefits, they're done by hand and you can make them tell whatever story you want. So it makes it look like the house is really far away from the house that's on the side street, and doesn't tower over it, but that sort of doesn't make sense because it's twice the height, if not it's actually well more than twice the height, and pulls all the way to 20 feet, 23 feet at the rear. So, and we asked for a survey. We didn't receive one. We need the survey to verify the side yards. So the architect needs to come to discuss this. Anything else? Okay.
That's it? Item number 25, 2018-29 BZ, 1637 Madison Place, Brooklyn.
Okay, with this one, we needed to make sure that none of the requested waivers were exceeding the allowable 10%. They provided the drawings to establish that, but when I actually did the math on, and the one I'm most concerned about because lot coverage really wasn't an issue, the one that I was most concerned about was floor area because they're going right to the edge. And when I did the math, I get that they're over the allowable. So the lot area is 3,100 square feet times 0.5 equals 1,550 square feet times 1.2, because you get a 20% bump up on the attic. I get 1,860 square feet times 10%, 1.1. I get 2,046 square feet, and the proposal is 2,055. And so granted,
I have 2,045. Maybe I copied it wrong.
okay, so maybe they wrote the wrong
2,050. I have 2,055.
55 on the drawings, and maybe there was a mistake. So it could be a typo. They need to verify all that carefully, because that number, we asked them for a floor area calculation drawing where he takes everything by little rectangles and adds them all together. And that's great, because that's what you really need to have to know. But it ends up being, I think, 9 square feet over. Don't want to be picky, but that's what our authority is. Okay.
Okay, new cases, item number 1, 2018-101 BZ, 21 West End Avenue, Manhattan. It's a physical culture establishment.
Indeed. So we have proof of service of initial application to officials and a notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. I didn't find a community board recommendation, though. And based on their website, it looks like this is a legalization. So, fire department needs to look at it from that perspective. The statement of facts, though, states that it will be sprinklered and will have a fire alarm, so I hope it has it.
I think we did get the community board
what I thought.
approval,
Yeah, we did.
36-0.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
I didn't see it, so, okay, do.
Yeah, they
have.
sent emails, and then I,
Okay, to approve. All right,
thank you.
and then, let's see, it's a legalization, and so, there was notice to neighbors, but because it's well, it's a condominium building, but I doubt that notice actually went to every single condo unit owner. So again, this is a building where, or a use where there are climbers, and the climbers sometimes don't quite make it all the way to the top, right? And so there are crash pads. And though the statement of facts claims crash pads don't make noise, you've got a lot of people potentially crashing. And so there might be sources of noise, shouting, vibration, whatever. And this turns out to be underneath a school. So I do think that neighbors should be notified about this hearing and be invited to submit written comments so that we just have an opportunity for them to voice concerns in case there are any.
Like next hearing.
Next hearing, yeah. That's what we do when we have legalizations with potentially noisy
So when you say
issues.
neighbors, are you asking the school or are you asking the residents?
All the people in the building. So the residential use is 5 floors above this.
Right.
But there's a school immediately above. But normally, the way you notify is you put the notice in the lobby. So with the school, I guess they have to notify the school directly because the school won't access from the same point. So maybe it's sent to the principal or something like that of the school. But the notice to the neighbors upstairs can be posted in the mailroom or whatever, however it works, the lobby, which is typical of what we do with the PCEs that are already operating and are potentially noisy or vibrating.
I was just curious when they actually opened.
And this looks like, based on the online, there's videos of it online. There's a lot of people climbing at the same time. You've got people hanging on lines. And so those things also make noise as they hang around, things like that, right?
I think the resistance lines make much more, reduce the sound of crashing because they're taking your
Yes.
weight down. But
Sure,
there's
the
certainly
pads
about
are
voice,
really thick, I know, yeah.
but certainly about because there's a school over it, I'd like to know if there's any complaints about any noise.
Right. It could also be noise from just people
People
shouting.
speaking, right.
Right? Because this is unlike all the other gyms, a situation where people might shout as they fall to earth.
They fall very slowly with the resistance line.
Yeah, it's not.
Well, that's
not a
if you've
thud.
done it before.
Yeah.
It's the ones who haven't done it before who will do the most screaming.
That's
It
fair.
says it's for beginners also, not just skilled climbers. Okay. Anyway,
That's worth a visit then. It's worth a visit then.
yes, it is. Okay.
Item number 2, 2018-128BZ, 103 North 10th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of and service of initial applications to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Again, I didn't find the community board recommendation, maybe someone
41
else?
to
Community board, we have.
Okay, approve. Approve, okay. We have 1 letter in support, and it doesn't appear to be a legalization, so we don't need to see massage licenses because they don't exist yet. I didn't see any other issues. They said there's going to be fire alarm and sprinklers, but it's a spa, so covered in water. Okay,
Done?
I believe they said massage will be provided, right?
Yes,
yes.
Yeah, but
So
they don't have
normally, if it was a,
but it wasn't open.
And
Yeah.
I didn't see a firm map.
oh, okay.
Oh, you need a firm map?
Do we usually ask for that for the PCEs too, right?
Yeah, I thought oh, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, sorry, I must have overlooked that one.
Okay.
Okay, item number 3, 2017-313BZ, 853 Kent Avenue.
Okay. We have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval. We have one letter of objection, which I tried so hard to figure out to read, but I actually couldn't read the handwriting. With respect to the uniqueness study, I'd like them to explain why a number of the vacant lots in the study area were excluded, even the ones in the M1 were not included in the analysis. With respect to the history of the use at the site, the Sanborn maps seem to show that the predominant uses were actually commercial, with either a C designation or an S designation. I'm not sure what that stands for. And the structure was really shallow at only 20 feet deep. But then they also have I-cards, and the I-cards show, but it's hard to know for how long those uses ran, that there was a store at the front and living at the rear, kind of like a mom and pop store, and then eventually the store at the front all became residential. So, but there's no readable dates on the I-cards, so I don't know when that happened. Those I-cards are always so amazing because there's a floor plan from, 19th century. There's also a building next door. This is the one that makes me concerned about the request only, because there's a building next door at Lot 8 that appears to have been built subsequent to 2007, because we have Sanborn maps that go to 2007 showing that as a vacant lot. It's 2 stories tall and built full to the lot line at the first floor. And it was not the subject of a variance as far as our website is concerned. I'm not sure how it got to be 2 stories tall, built full to the lot line, because that's more than 1 FAR. But in any event, but my question is, I wasn't able, well, I don't have the floor plans, so, and maybe it's 2 stories because it also doesn't have a lot of floor area on the part that's 2 stories. It might be mostly a mezzanine, and the rest is mechanical, or there's parking on the lower level, something like that. But for me, really, the main question is whether the scope of the waiver is in line with the hardship, because the scope is 2.4 FAR, building in a 1 FAR zoning district, which is including the use change, right? I thought the building height can work in the neighborhood, but 3-story buildings are actually more common. So if there was any play, it would be in the height of the building. There is this 5-foot-high railing in the front of the windows and the balconies. I'd like to understand what that is.
The Juliet?
Well, Juliet balconies don't have 5-foot-high railings, because that's hard for Juliet to let her, to lean over and get a rose. Even Rapunzel would have trouble with this one. So, and I just have to add that there's to be no projecting balconies at the front of the building, and railings around the balconies cannot create floor area, which I think they might if they're 5 feet high, because they're limited by the zoning resolution to 42 inches. So I think it creates floor area, actually. Anybody else?
So in the financials, as of right, the return is much lower than what's suggested as the minimum from realty rates at somewhere around 4%. And I had a question for the residential comparables. There actually is no information on the number of bedrooms of the comparables or the apartment layouts. So if they could provide that information, that would be helpful. And then also for the residential construction costs, they're at $207 the square foot, plus an additional $108,000 for FF&E for superior finishes to the condos versus the rental properties. But there are, in the construction cost listing, there's a finishes and specialties category. And so I wanted to know, what is that for then? And why do you have to add on an additional 108 to the 320,000? I mean, why are you going to add on 108,000 when the specialties category actually adds $320,000 already?
It seems like it finishes twice.
Right.
Right.
And pretty fancy finishes at that, at 160,000 per apartment.
Wow, I'll say.
Yeah. So.
Well,
they
the
should-
kitchens are double kitchens, but that doesn't mean that, doesn't account for
It's
that
pretty
much.
high-end
Yes.
double kitchen,
Yeah.
and then bathrooms, I guess, but they should explain that.
Okay. All right. No one else?
Item number 4, 2018-33BZ, 9141 97th Street, Queens. This application will be postponed to January 15, 2019 for failure to notify. Item number 5, 2018-51BZ, 1101 Plainview Avenue, Queens. This project will also be postponed to 1/8/2019 for failure to notify.
Great, thank you.
This concludes the public hearing, the public review session for November 7, 2008.
Yes.